What's up guys, Anthony here with our nuts and bolts feature for the week. And today we're going to talk about effects pedals. We're going to talk about 3 effects pedals that are very, very closely related in the modulation section of your pedal board or whatever your setup is. We're going to talk about phase, we're going to talk about chorus, and we're going to talk about flanger. What are they? What do they do? And I think most importantly, what do they sound like? How does it affect your playing? What does it bring to the table for you? Because there really isn't, there are differences between them, but there's also a lot of gray area where they sort of start blending into each other. You can get a lot of the same sounds from the different pedals, and it can make it really, really difficult to understand exactly what's happening under the hood, so to speak. I'm going to explain it the best that I know. I'm sure I'll leave a few key ingredients out that the pedal makers and some of the true gearheads there might want to correct me on or add in there. But I tend to focus on what do things sound like, what's the end result of it. So, phase shifting. Talking about that very briefly and exactly, again, what's going on kind of under the hood there. First, let me say, all 3 of these, because they sound alike, they have a few features that are very similar. All 3 of these essentially take your signal and double it. Then things change. So, in a phase shifter, or a phaser, what's essentially going on is you have your dry signal going through the pedal. The pedal at that point is going to double your signal, and it's going to affect that second signal to some extent. And what's happening is it's going to put kind of like a high pass and maybe a low pass filter, what they would call maybe an all pass filter on there. And what you're going to get at that point is sort of, make sure this is off, yeah. So, you have your signal, and then you're going to have another signal that is kind of changing that one, blending them together, peaks and valleys. So you're going to get these high peaks of low pass, low peaks of high pass, making it an all pass filter. But what that gives you is moments where your sound is in and out of phase from one another. So if you're familiar with like an out of phase switch on a guitar and how that kind of thins your sound out, a phase shifter, depending on the speed or the rate at which you're doing that, is going to do that. It's going to make the sound thinner or fatter or dead even, depending on where your dry signal is, and this phase, the peaks and valleys are kind of hitting that. I'll play a little bit, and I'm a bass player. No one out there needs to hear me play guitar ever. So I have this Seric bass in my hands. Thanks, Jake. And what I'm going to just play, I have fuzz on there because I feel like fuzz or overdrive is going to kind of help bring some of the life, some of the effects out of this a little bit more. So on low speed with phase. So when I'm playing, you can hear my dry signal or just the fuzz signal that's getting fed into that always there, but you're hearing that other signal up and down, getting thin, getting larger sounding, and also matching that dry signal exactly. If we raise the speed up, a lot more warbling, it gets a little pitchy, but you'll hear that effect going at a much faster rate. Good example too, because you hear that dry signal staying the same, and these fast peaks going up and down on the affected signal, we'll call it. So that's phase shifting. Now we're going to get into where really some of the nuances lie between these 2 modulation effects, chorus and flanger. We can kind of talk about them at the same time, what the differences are between them. So both, like a phase shifter, is taking your original signal and keeping it the same. It's also going to take a second signal and it is going to change that. How? Where a phase shifter is just adding, like I said, peaks and valleys essentially to the signal, taking it in and out of phase. What's happening with flanger and chorus actually they're delay pedals to some extent. They're just very short delay pedals when we're talking in relationship to, say, you know, a Boss digital delay or the Earthquaker Devices Avalanche Run, or insert any true delay pedal name there. So what happens with a chorus pedal, this is a longer delayed signal for we'll call it the wet signal, you know, the affected signal internally there. Longer delay times. Shorter delay times in a flanger. So where on a chorus pedal, that second signal in there is going to be probably starting around 10 milliseconds up to, say, 30 milliseconds. To put that into perspective, a lot of delay pedals are 500 milliseconds. So we're talking in much shorter terms. A flanger is going to max out at 10 milliseconds of time. Probably. There's probably a few exceptions out there to that, but let's just say maxing at 10 milliseconds. It could be 1 millisecond, so very, very short. But what happens with chorus is, if we're looking at your dry signal again, the unaffected signal, what's happening with chorus in a very uniform manner, it's taking that other signal from, let's say, 5 milliseconds to 30 to 5 to 30 to 5 to 30 to 5. Depending on where you put the speed knob at, or maybe a rate knob, or a knob that's going to control that, and that's uniform there. What's happening with that? So with chorus, you get a very rhythmic kind of thing going on there, and the traditional effect of chorus is to fatten a singular sound up, to make it sound like a chorus of sound. So whether it's 2 guitars, in some instances 3. I know, like TC Electronics might make one that's a tri-chorus, or have that option on there, where you're actually going to have, you know, different wet signals doing different things, but in a uniform fashion. You'll kind of hear that here. Turn that depth down a little bit. I'm going to turn the speed down a little bit too. And we speed that up, depth up. You know, and like in a chorus, in a chorus, if you have 2 people singing, one guy's, you know, singing the perfect pitch, someone else isn't. It sounds like they're in the same pitch, but you have a very slight difference in that. That's kind of what we get with the chorus pedal. So they get a little bit pitchy right away. It is always going to have a certain amount of like detuning to it with a chorus pedal. Now, moving to a flanger, a much shorter delay time. So you're never going to have a real rhythmic approach to it. It's a little bit more random because it's a shorter delay time to it. And you also have this knob, especially on this micro flanger, which is the regeneration knob. Regeneration, much like on a delay pedal where you get into like oscillating mode, where you're giving the delayed signal back into the delayed signal, so on and so forth. You're cycling into each other, creating kind of random peaks that are like hitting your dry signal sometimes and sometimes not in a very uniform way. Where chorus is very uniform, flanger is not uniform because you're regenerating that signal into itself. And I'll play a little bit with that now. So if that millisecond time is, say, 5 milliseconds of delay, and you're feeding 5 milliseconds back into 5 milliseconds, back into 5 milliseconds, back into 5 milliseconds, you're creating these odd pockets of rhythm that essentially are giving, you know, the flanger sort of a randomized sort of bit of modulation that's going on to it. And also, interesting fact, which I did not know until today, and I'm sure if you've read it, you might have read this online. The flanger effect, it's not, I always thought a flanger was called a flanger because it sounds like flanging. I know that makes no sense. But essentially, why that's called a flanger is, back in the reel-to-reel days, they would record 2 bits of tape identically on a reel, and then an engineer, while they were playing back, would put their thumb on the flange of the other reel and slow it down slightly, that giving you what we are perceiving, you know, or what was perceived then as, well, I guess what they try to mimic as delay time, a very short amount of delay time. You know, and eventually those might get back to unity and then back out, back to unity and back out. You have that kind of almost like phase in a way, but that's why it's called a flanger, because of the flange of the tape reel that the engineer was actually pressing his thumb down on to create that delayed effect. So that said, you can get some flange effect out of chorus by taking the speed or the depth at this, I guess, on this down, because the shorter the delay time on a chorus pedal, the closer it is to flange, and the longer the delay time on the flange pedal, the closer it is to chorus. So again, you may hear a recording and you're saying, that's a great chorus sound, it's actually flange. You might hear something that you're perceiving as a flanger sound and it's actually a chorus. Or you might hear flanger that's regenerating back into itself, a phase shifter regenerates back into itself too. So you can really confuse these pedals together as far as what sound is what. I know that's a lot of information to take in. It sure was to me, trying to get that all into kind of a concise line there. And I don't know that I did it all the way well, but I hope it does answer some questions for you. The recurring theme with me is get into a store, come into Empire Music here, go to your local music store, wherever you're at. Try them out. If a buddy has some, take them home, mess around with them. See what inspires you to just make some noise, make some sounds, whether they're way out of the box, whether they're very in the box, combine them with other effects, flip them upside down, and just try stuff. Hopefully you'll encounter a new sound or a sound that you've heard on records that just inspire you to keep making music and just to write some stuff or to play something interesting. So I'm just going to make a few sounds with the pedals here. I think we got another camera angle we might be able to drop in there. If that goes well. And yeah, just make a little bit of noise here. So, like I said, a heavy sense of experimentation is always going to be the best tool. I can explain this stuff, or anyone can explain it to you ad nauseum, but you got to sit down and really try this stuff and just see what works for you. So yeah, I hope that answers a little bit of questions here on phaser, chorus, and flange. 3 key ingredients to your modulation section, easy for me to say. And yeah, hope that clears some stuff up. You can check us out online at empiremusiconline.com. Hit subscribe, hit like, share it around, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, hit us on YouTube, and stop in the shop. Give us a call here, 412-343-5299. Thanks a lot.